Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Pac-Man here, and I am from the likes of the Mexi Toys videos here, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll present to you our new Let's Play, because after all, did you guys even believe about the fact that it's been about 4 months ago since we've last played Winnie the Pooh's Rumbly Tumbly adventure, back on the forms of been by the end of 2023, by able to actually tackle through the console version of the game, specifically the PlayStation 2 version, but here we are now in 2024. Specifically, today's date, of course, there is the 6th of April today, in some cases in 2024 today, and here we are, we're about to tackle through the Game Boy Advance version of Winnie the Pooh's Rumbly Tumbly adventure. Obviously, this version did came out in 2005, the same year as the forms of how it does on the console version of the game, in addition to Pooh's Heffalump movie was around that time as well, on the big screen. So, as a result, no matter what though, is about the fact I'm a little bit optimistic about this version of the game, similar to the forms of how it does it on Piglet's big game, also on the Game Boy Advance as well, back in last year. So, no matter what though, because if you couldn't tell already, the actual menu selection for that particular language selecting screen, it looks very similar to the forms of how it does it on Piglet's big game, believe it or not, except the fact that the only biggest difference is this time is obviously about the fact that we'll get ourselves a different title, as well as the different title screen is actually a lot more colorful this time around, as opposed to plain white background title screen ever since in Piglet's big game on the Game Boy Advance. And as soon as we're able to actually press the start button right here, then we do realize about the fact that the actual aesthetics about this particular version of the game looks incredibly similar to the forms of how it does it on Piglet's big game on the Game Boy Advance. Like, you're able to go into top-down perspective, and even the scrapbook itself, the actual sprites of that particular thing, looks very identical to Piglet's big game, basically. So we'll just go straight into that particular scrapbook right here, and obviously we can able to once again experiencing not only the options, where you can able to change your various settings, ranging from music turned on or off, or as well as the forms of some sound effects turned on and off, as well as the credits, view controls, and even with the language selecting screen, which, keep this in mind, this is the European version of the game, because unlike the American version, it does not contain any of those multiple languages and stuff like that. So with that being said, let's dive right into this, shall we? On a not-so-blustery day in 100-acre wood, Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin decided to climb a tree. Oh bother, there's a rumbly in my tumbly. You always hungry, Pooh Bear. Why don't you try thinking of something else? It's a very good idea, Christopher Robin. But what shall I think about? Well, you could remember some of your favorite times. Oh yes. No, think. My favorite times are often at birthday parties. Oh, I know just the perfect thing. And so Pooh decided to remember those birthday parties by looking at his friends' birthday scrapbooks. So yeah, I'm pretty sure the actual plot in this version of the game plays pretty similar to the console version of the game, except the fact that much like in Piglet's big game on the Game Boy Advance, you do realize about the fact that there's a lack of cutscenes involved, which it turns into still images, and as a result they heavily borrowed some of those familiar set pieces from the likes of any other Winnie the Pooh movies, ranging from Pooh's Grand Adventure in a Search for Christopher Robin, alongside with the Tigger movie, as well as the forms of Piglet's big movie, and you name the rest, which we'll explain more about it if we somehow manage to able to get the game started. So because of that though, as you can see, unlike the ones of how it does it in Piglet's big game, on the Game Boy Advance version most likely, there aren't any scrapped levels this time. So because of that though, all we have to do for this point is that we have to simply just able to go in and get started with the forms of the first birthday scrapbook, which appears to be Piglet's birthday scrapbook. And basically though, this entire stage plays out like a tutorial, and no matter what though, just try able to get used to with how the gameplay mechanics worked, alongside with the controls you're gonna have to work with, and all that stuff. Like, for instance, we have to pick up this iron key, so that way we can able to actually open up the gate, similar to the forms of how it does on the console version of the game. And as far as I'm aware, is about the fact that for this entire gameplay itself, on the Game Boy Advance version of Winnie the Pooh's Rumbly Tumbly Adventure, well, kind of thinking about it, it plays very identical to the forms of how it does it on Piglet's Big Game on the Game Boy Advance, except the noticeable differences this time is that rather than collecting cookies, instead we're going to be collecting honey pots as we expected when it comes to likely for the console version of the game, alongside with the forms of the handheld version respectively. Although, keep this in mind though, as you can tell, that this is going to be a full 100% completion playthrough of this game. Well, mind you, there's going to be one exception to this, however, though, is that we'll explain more details about this particular topic though until for later on. So because of this though, as you can see, we somehow collected every single honey pot in journey forms of one of those parts of the map. So meaning about the fact that, as you notice with that particular cross symbol, this means you've basically collected every single honey pot in one of those parts of this entire section. So because of this though, and as you can tell, much like the forms of how it does it on Piglet's Big Game on the Game Boy Advance, that basically if you come across into something sparkly has been affected in journey forms within certain obstacles or objects in general, basically though you can able to actually simply punch the thing, or even some cases shove the actual object or this little sparkle effect. Basically it actually caused the honey pots to able to come out. And just like the ones how it does on the Game Boy Advance version of Piglet's Big Game, you can only collect up to 2 honey pots as opposed to 5, unlike the console version of the game. Again, it's probably because of the handheld's limitations basically. So because of that though, yes, there might be a couple of times that, much like in Piglet's Big Game on the Game Boy Advance version, mind you, there might be a couple of times where certain honey pots will attempt to get stuck at certain points, which as a result, thankfully, just like the console version of the game, basically though, if you don't collect the honey pots in time, obviously they just ended up going back onto that specific object where they'll still show us a sparkle effect, which as a result, yeah, that's as basic as far as I can say about it. So of course, that if you really want able to look up on the map, basically though, you have to able to press the, let's just say the select button, so you can able to actually just to see where exactly what your next destination is about to be going to. So, relatively speaking, that's as far as I can say about this, basically. It's like, basically, a Winnie the Pooh version of Piglet's Big Game, except the fact that, obviously, the entire environment is going to most likely takes place in 100 Acre Wood, as opposed to the forms of some unique themes from the likes of specific dreams, ranging from let's just say a candy, chocolate, sweet dream, alongside with the forms of the cardboard papercraft environment, as well as the forms of the spooky manor, neither with the forms of the actual garden factory and stuff like that, unlike in Piglet's Big Game on the Game Boy Advance version. So because of that though, so yeah, as you can tell about the fact that in order to able to actually come across into those moments where we have to shove things, basically though you have to pay attention to where the sparkles are within the forms of the red color variation, as you can tell. So basically though is about the fact that I'm pretty sure Winnie the Pooh as a playable character in this game plays pretty much identical to Piglet, except the fact that there is no combat involved, which as a result, if we go on to the next point, basically though is about the fact that much like the console version of the game, since about the fact that we have to run away from not only for several of Heffalumps, but also with Wuzzles as well, so this means we must find a balloon to pop in order able to scare them. So because of that though, yeah, you get the idea for this point. So because of that though, and fun fact for you is about the fact that I'm pretty concerned about the fact that, like what Maxi has already mentioned about, ever since in a console version of the game, basically though, this is the first ever version that he did somehow experience long time ago. Like, we used to have the original cartridge version of the game back then, but unfortunately though, we somehow lost it due to the forms of moving apartments. So because of that though, yeah, it's kind of unfortunate though. So yeah, that's as far as I can say about it. And while looking back at it now, I will admit though right away is that this version of the game is not exactly the greatest. Like, I will will admit though right away is that the music in the background is getting a little bit irritating, and it's also kind of repetitive as well. So that'll be my only major criticism, I feel like, for the sake of the forms of this version of the game. Not only because it's repetitive, but it's also about the fact that it gets a little bit ear-grating after a while. Especially noticeable whenever I turn down the volume up. At least back in the day, what Sonic did tell me something is that, generally speaking, it's about the fact that his ear starts to bleed after a while, which as a result is not that very pleasant. So because of that though, yeah, and just like the ones how it does on the console version of the game, in addition with Piglet's Big Game, both console and the Game Boy Advance versions as well, that collecting specific items is essential in order to progress. Like for instance, in Winnie the Pooh's Rumbly Tumbly Adventure, of course, that basically collecting honey pots is essential, because as soon as you're able to realize you come across into a bunch of bees, and basically though, in order able to progress, we must give a certain amount of honey pots to those specific bees, and then once you've done so, you can able to move on to the next point. So, pretty self-explanatory for the most part, and as you can see, the password system functions a little bit differently this time around, because normally back in Piglet's Big Game, on the Game Boy Advance version, is that you're able to actually get the password feature as soon as you're done with those specific dreams, whilst compared to the forms of how it does it in here though, you're able to actually get the password as soon as you're able to continue your progressioning for certain birthday stages. So, yeah, that seems pretty interesting. And speaking of something interesting though, is that unlike in Piglet's Big Game on the Game Boy Advance, that what the password system functions as, is that basically though, you have to figure out a correct combination when it comes to not only for certain colored blocks, but also with the forms of the actual specific shape symbols, and then once you're able to try to figure out the specific combination, then obviously you can able to continue your progressioning into the game. Whilst in here though this time around is that this is all basically numbered combinations. So as soon as you're able to try to figure out exactly what the numbered combination works out to be, and if you insert the correct combination correctly, then obviously you can able to continue your progressioning. So because of that though, despite the fact that this game did somehow came out in 2005, so around that time when certain Game Boy Advance games up to this point, to be more specifically with, let's just say, Mario Tennis Power Tour, alongside with the forms of Donkey Kong Country 3 for the Game Boy Advance, both of those games does have a save feature, whilst in here though, we have to utilize with the password system, because obviously that could be also applied to the forms of some other games as well, ranging from Finding Nemo, alongside with The Incredibles, as well as Piglet's Big Game on the Game Boy Advance, and you pretty much name the rest of it though, which I will admit though right away, that's a little bit picky for my part, especially noticeable, because whenever when I somehow managed able to realize about something is about the fact that, well, I will admit though right away, that my first impressions of this version of the game while looking back on it, even to this day, is not that very impressive in my opinion, because no matter what though, I'm pretty much more accustomed to the console version of the game still, so that's besides the point in my honest opinion. So anyway, so now we've somehow managed able to place that little wood plank, so we can able to insert that as a bridge, and now we can able to progress onto the specific portion of the stage, and obviously I'm still gonna able to try to collect, you know, a certain amount of honey pots basically, so just in case for, you know, for the sake of the forms of trying to collect enough, so that way we can able to actually progress as you expect. So now, as far as I'm aware, it's about the fact that, obviously, if you couldn't tell already, is about the fact that there are some interesting stuff I'd like to point out. Is that, first of all, we somehow managed able to realize about the fact that, I can't believe by saying this, is about the fact that we somehow come to a point where, obviously, is about the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster Duel has recently gone into surpassed 60 million downloads so far, which I know it sounds a bit strange to able to mention about this particular stuff though, which as a result, it's probably best if we let either Maxi will discuss more details about the forms of other stuff for later, to be more specifically about the fact that Maxi is still working on Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 for the continuation of the DLC, and as a result so far, that he did recently complete every single very hard mode in Journey forms within the Sonic's playthrough now, so as a result he's now going to be moving on to Silver's very hard mode. So best of luck for him anyway, especially noticeable because obviously certain stages are, I'm not gonna lie, pretty difficult, especially noticeable because, well, then again, he'll explain more about it if he goes back on to Sonic 06, and I believe he's almost done with that game before we move on to the next Sonic games we can able to tackle through, just before when Sonic Cross Shadow Generations is definitely gonna be coming, so... Anyway, so we've met up with Piglet right here, and gee, kind of thinking about it, the actual sprite is very similar to the forms of how it does it on Piglet's big game. And kind of thinking about it though is about the fact that whenever I try to able to stand right next to Piglet right here as Winnie the Pooh, kind of think about it, the actual height looks a bit... Well, I don't know how do I explain about this, because as far as I'm aware, that unlike in Piglet's big game on the Game Boy Advance versions, that the only two playable characters you can able to only play as, which there are both Piglet and Tigger, whilst it's kind of weird about the fact that Winnie the Pooh was not directly a playable character on the Game Boy Advance version of Piglet's big game for some reason, which again, is most likely because of the handheld limitations, and I know we're probably gonna say this a lot throughout the majority of this playthrough, similar to the forms of how it does it on Piglet's big game on the Game Boy Advance back in last year, and no matter what though is about the fact that since we're still in 2024 after all, it's a good thing we decided able to actually tackle for this game right now, because obviously if you couldn't tell already about the fact that we technically already celebrated the 20th anniversary of Winnie the Pooh, Springtime with Roo, which as far as what I would say, Coco Bandicoot has already mentioned about this, or Maxi potentially, that they've both somehow mentioned about the forms of while looking back on Winnie the Pooh Springtime with Roo already. While looking back on it though, after 20 years since when it first came out, I will say it's not that great in my opinion, but it was a decent one at best. Well, to be more specifically, when it comes to the forms of, well, the animation is definitely a little bit top notch, while looking back on it though, although I will admit though right away, I'm still felt a little bit disappointed about the forms of the lack of characters for the sake of the forms of certain appearances and stuff like that. Like, that was the only Winnie the Pooh movie that does not feature Christopher Robin at all. So, yeah, that seems very odd and strange at the same time, alongside with the forms of Owl as well, and even Gopher essentially as well. So, yeah, you probably get the idea for this point. So, and of course, just like the console version of the game, there might be a couple of times where basically though is about the fact that we can able to play as one of those multiple playable characters, except this time, we can now able to take control of Eeyore, just like the console version of the game, and in this part right here is about the fact that we definitely need to catch all three of those butterflies, and once you've done so already, then you can obviously move along, and once you're done with that, obviously we can now able to talk to Kangaroo again, so that way we can able to like borrow the broom, so that way we can able to deliver the broom to Piglet. So to make sure about the fact that he will able to indeed have the most perfect birthday ever. So yeah, that might be saying something. So, and of course, just like the console version of the game, there might be a couple of times where basically several of Heffalumps and Wurzels will attempt to respawn, so of course in order able to get rid of them is by simply pop the balloon, which is weird about the fact that the balloon itself is now red as opposed to blue, so I honestly have no idea how they managed to able to come for that decision. Oh well, no big deal. And of course, the item inventory system plays very similar to the console version of the game, including Piglet's big game as well. Whilst unlike in Piglet's big game, you can only carry out to 3 items, which is quite a lot. Whilst in the forms within the Game Boy Advance version of Piglet's big game, I'm pretty sure you can only carry up to 2 items thanks to the forms of the L and R buttons. Whilst in the forms within Winnie the Pooh's Rumbly Tumbly Adventure, both on the console version in addition to a handheld version as well, you can only carry up to 1 item. So because of that though, what's even weird is that you can able to press L or R buttons this time around in order able to actually just to activate that specific item. So yeah, it seems kind of weird and all that stuff. So because of that though, yeah, that's as far as I can try to talk about the forms of this particular version of the game itself. Although as far as I'm aware is about the fact that the actual, oh jeez, the actual Heffalumps did somehow almost approach towards me. So And of course, if you do manage to able to go near to a Heffalump or a Woolsall, as well as the forms of some other familiar enemies later down the road, obviously if you get scared by them, obviously you just essentially go all the way back to the beginning portion of that segment. So because of that though, so yeah, we've scared off all of these bees, or to be more specifically, we've somehow given the some more honey pots to certain bees, and then once we've done so already, we can now able to deliver the broom to Piglet right here. And it's even weird, that particular still image right there, it actually features Piglet based off from Piglet's big movie, except the fact that there's a lack of grass. So yeah, still it's pretty weird, especially noticeable. Again, it's probably because of the handheld's limitations. So, and that's basically all there is to it for Piglet's birthday. So now we've done with that, and now we're moving on to Rue's birthday scrapbook, which, as a result, we should probably end things off at this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of Winnie the Pooh's Rumbly Tumbly Adventure for the Game Boy Advance version. Is that we're about to tackle through Rue's birthday scrapbook. So as a result, the majority of the stages in this version of the game goes by a lot faster and shorter at the same time. So anyways, I will see you guys until tomorrow. Later, fellas.